What is the best way to teach Black history? Focus on slavery and freedom? Maybe the Jim Crow era? The fight for civil rights? Perhaps it's about martyrs like Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar. But what about Mahalia, or Maya, or Michelle? What about the people who do what's never been done, or invent the things we take for granted? Equipping children to learn Black history can be tough with today's controversies over what gets taught. Getting this right could empower struggling communities, reminding them how much they have to be proud of. Let's get some insights from people who are teaching Black history. From actor LeVar Burton on the 45th anniversary of the miniseries Roots.
Chattel slavery in America was the most cruel institution ever visited in the modern era.
And we'll get the truth about critical race theory from someone who actually teaches it.
There are those who are just trying to paint a picture of critical race theory that has nothing to do with what it really is.
Plus, we'll explore how some young adults are sharing this history in new ways. Some might avoid learning it, but there are ways to make people want it. This is the challenge. This is the opportunity. This is Black History Now. Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. You know, we all know that kid in class, the one who whines to their history teacher, "Oh, when am I ever gonna use this? I mean, what does this have to do with me?" Maybe that kid was you. Well, that question may be easier to answer with Black history. And that might be why it's been so hard for some folks to embrace. You know, Black history is filled with injustices that can be very painful to talk about. Some come away from these stories feeling overwhelmed. Others feel empowered. So what might make this difficult history easier to embrace? As I was brainstorming this program, I thought about who first taught Black history to me. The way she did this was pretty ingenious. It was about history I could use, about the things we use every day.
You probably learned about Dr. Charles Drew. You had some of this in class?
Zandra Harris has been a librarian and educator for more than 35 years in Palm Beach County, Florida. Among her long-term projects, an exhibit highlighting the achievements of Black inventors. It's a way to show Black children what they could achieve.
You can say you own that once you get a patent for it.
I know firsthand. She's also my mother.
Hey, love.
Hey.
Oh.
As I grew up, her exhibit grew too. She added items to highlight the contributions African Americans made to music. Okay. Technology, a remote control, toys, even whaling.
You remember that?
I don't remember the story behind it, but I remember this harpoon being around the house all the time for years and years. It's like, why do we have a weapon in the house? Do you remember how that started?
There is actually a Black Inventors Museum. So I thought I can duplicate this because children are much more visual. They were practical, everyday things that I know have greatly impacted the quality of life for America. And I know a big part, the people who are responsible for these inventions and innovations. I really, really want the students who are able to come around and look at the exhibit to think, maybe I can do this. And if nothing else, at least appreciate the shoulders they stand on.
South Florida has quite a few people like my mom, curating our legacy and celebrating our stories. In Miami's Overtown neighborhood, you'll find the Black Archives. It's an institution founded by another Black librarian, Dorothy Jenkins Fields. Timothy Barber is its executive director. Good Bread Alley
was the place to be for many people, depending on what era you're in.
Overtown was once called Colored Town during the Jim Crow era. It was one of the only places Black Miamians could live, but many found ways to thrive. Everybody knows Jackson Memorial, but I did not know about Christian Hospital.
Jackson Hospital turned blacks away. Christian Hospital stepped in. You gave us lemons, we made lemonade.
My understanding of Black history was always very empowering because it was about what Black people did as opposed to what was done to us.
If you don't know where you come from, you'll never know when they're trying to take you back. And that's what the history is about.
But who gets to define what this history is about? That is where things get political.
Parents protesting what they call critical race theory at school board meetings across the country.
As of today, 35 state legislatures have 120 active bills that limit how race, gender, and history are taught in public schools, according to NBC News analysis.
Florida is very much among them. Bills being considered by the state's lawmakers would let parents sue educators teaching certain topics or ban curricula intended to cause guilt or discomfort. Republican State Representative Randy Fine is pushing for bans on what he calls leftist ideologies from being taught.
I believe that when you emphasize ideology, you crowd out history.
We met up with him in Overtown, which has since been decimated by highway construction and redevelopment. It's a living lesson in how history affects us today. And he says we need more of that.
Yesterday, we brought a replica boxcar from the Holocaust, a cattle car that millions of Jews were taken to their death in, to the Capitol. Both Republicans and Democrats all came out so that Florida could make clear we've got no place for hate in our state.
What did you think the impact of that was?
Well, it was profound because people got to experience it. People were in there for 10 minutes and they were uncomfortable. We said, imagine you were in there for 3 days. It was really a sobering moment for everybody.
There's a parallel in terms of the event you described to teach the Holocaust and some of this debate about teaching Black history in terms of creating a real visceral sense of empathy for what the people who were involved in this went through. Is politics kind of getting in the way of teaching that?
I think so, because what's unfortunately happened in our country is we've conflated ideology with history. When you teach history, these things happened. How people feel about them, they should come to those realizations on their own.
The bill's Representative Fine supports and sponsors do not mention critical race theory by name. Still, he has called it evil and racist.
How do we move past this and actually talk about what we need to talk about?
I think what we need to do is we need to make that distinction clear. Critical race theory is called a theory. It's not U.S. history theory. History happened. People should know more of it, not less. The good and the bad, because that's the story of America. In America, it's not about where you start, it's where you end.
Despite the politics behind all this, everyone I spoke to did express one thing in common. They all said we should teach history in powerful, factual ways.
We don't want to water down Black history. We want to give you the facts. And that's what our job is, to present the facts to what existed. We don't glorify it, we don't underrate it. So we just try to tell it like it is.
To hear my mom tell it, we should have faith in today's kids that they will find the truth, even if we refuse to teach it.
Like the Diary of Anne Frank, the lady told me not to let her daughter read it. I said, okay, but I won't remove it because there are other parents who don't have a problem with this. The little girl comes back 2 weeks later. She said, can I show you something? I said, sure. She puts the Diary of Anne Frank on my desk. I said, where did you get this? She said, the public library. She said, I don't know what my mother thinks I'm doing when she drops me off at the library and goes get her hair done for 2 hours.
Mom's right. Kids are great at finding what we hide from them. Which brings us to a topic some parents have pushed to hide from students, even though it is not being taught. To the best of our knowledge, not one public grade school in America teaches critical race theory. It's come up a lot lately, but not in a very thoughtful way. Back in December, a poll found that 7 out of 10 people do not know what critical race theory is. If you're among them, don't feel bad, because right now we're going to get a factual, reliable, plain English explanation of what it is and how it actually fits into teaching Black history. Joining us to do that is Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a professor of law at Columbia and UCLA. She's also the executive director of the African American Policy Forum and the host of Intersectionality Matters. Professor Crenshaw, welcome to the program.
So happy to be here.
So suppose I wanted to take your class on critical race theory. What are the prerequisites? How do I know that I'm qualified to study critical race theory for real?
Well, first of all, you'd be a law student because I teach in a law school. Most critical race theory courses, because they are largely about law, happen in law schools. Now, you might be able to take a critical race theory course in undergraduate courses like sociology, political science, even history, because critical thinking about race in American society isn't limited to law. So the point is that you'd be taking courses that would allow you to see how race and racism have functioned in American society, how race has been constructed in American society, and importantly, what the contemporary consequences of that history happen to be. This whole set of ideas that are associated with the notion that we've inherited a country that has both good and bad, and that good and bad is contemporarily significant. So there are those who are just trying to paint a picture of critical race theory that has nothing to do with what it really is. So let's start there. But in terms of why facts are important, some of the reasons that some of the parents who are against critical race theory say that they want to push it out of the curriculum is that some of the facts that are part of Black history are facts that they fear make their children feel bad, or facts that they think make America appear to be a bad place. So in the idea that we need to determine what needs to be taught and not, through a lens of what makes us feel good or not, they are opposing some of these facts, like Ruby Bridges, who's one of the young girls who desegregated schools. She's still alive. She's a Black woman who wrote her autobiography to tell young kids what it was like to be a Black child in the 50s and 60s. A lot of parents don't want that taught. That is Black history, and that is American history.
Can you empathize at all, Professor, with families, instructors, school board officials, maybe even politicians, who sincerely say, that they're struggling to deal with the discomforting parts of Black history, that they don't mind learning the story, but that the emotion around it, the discomfort around it is making it hard for them to really sink their teeth in. Can you empathize with that at all?
Oh, it's not a matter of empathizing. Of course, we have a history that involves enslavement. We have a history that involves genocide. We have a history that involves apartheid. So, of course, it's discomforting. It's discomforting for everybody, right? The problem is that only one set of discomforts, only one set of students seem to drive the concern about how these stories get told. What about the discomfort that Black students experience when they are not told about segregation, when we talk about Black firsts, but we don't talk about why the firsts come so late? What's the inference that's drawn about the fact that we only may have a Black Supreme Court justice who's a woman in 2022? If you don't tell the history of the barriers and the obstacles, you lead to the inference that there must be something wrong with the people. And that is a discomfort to Black students that we ought to be concerned about as well.
I feel like what you're talking about dovetails with what my mom was trying to do with the Black Inventors Museum, which is to put all this context around these inventions. Before I have to let you go, what is one thing that you wish more educators, parents, community institutions was doing a little differently to improve the overall conversation about Black history? For Black children, non-Black children, if there's one thing you wish we did more of, less of, or differently, what would that be?
Not make Black history a February enterprise, understanding that Black history is American history. American history includes everything, and we need to be teaching it 12 months, 9 months out of the year. So it's the exceptional notion that it's something that we just visit occasionally. It's a side story. It's not the main story. That is the thing that I wish we didn't do as much.
Professor Kimberly Crenshaw of Columbia and UCLA, an actual honest-to-God scholar on critical race theory. This is the for real. This is the for real answer. Professor, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, history is about storytelling, and no medium tells stories quite like television. Still to come, we will mark the 45th anniversary of Roots with LeVar Burton. How did that series help people embrace the truth about slavery? And could that help us teach Black history today? LeVar Burton joins us just ahead. Stay close. Welcome back. Black history is also about Black achievement, and we've seen a number of achievements on television. From Nat King Cole breaking through with his own show here on NBC back in 1956, to 1968 when Harry Belafonte filled in for Johnny Carson. Celebrities and civil rights leaders shared the couch, bringing the stories of Black Americans into the mainstream. But no program matched the mainstreaming effect of Roots. Alex Haley's novel became an ABC miniseries running for 8 nights in 1977. Roots might have some lessons to teach us about relating Black history. It centers around slavery, but it's not really about slavery. It's about a family beginning before enslavement and certainly not ending there. And in a big surprise to even some TV executives, people wanted to see this story. TV ratings show that about half of all American TV households watched the finale of Roots. Compare that to ABC's other hits that year, like Happy Days or Laverne and Shirley. They reached about a third of households. Roots also inspired more Americans to explore their own family histories. According to the National Archives, after the show aired, genealogy became one of the nation's most popular hobbies, just behind coin collecting and stamp collecting. Joining us now is LeVar Burton. He played a young Kunta Kinte in Roots. Mr. Burton, welcome. It is so good to see you again.
My pleasure. Joshua, how are you, man?
I'm well. I'm well. There's so many things to think about and talk about when it comes to the history of this series. And we got so many comments from people about what's kind of seared into their mind from Roots. I have to wonder, first of all, you've had some years now to reflect back on the series. Is this now what you expected when you were a young LeVar Burton doing his very first TV show?
None of this, which is to say none of what has transpired post Roots was expected or anticipated by me. Roots was an event that changed my life forever and irrevocably. And that journey that I've been on from January of 1977 until now, that's a story that continues to unfold. I don't believe that it is over by any stretch of the imagination. Roots was the first time that we were able to experience the story of chattel slavery in America from the point of view of those enslaved. And that was revolutionary and revelationary to not just America, but to countries and cultures around the globe. All of the history books that I was exposed to really downplayed the institution of slavery. I mean, so much so as to go so far in saying that there were slaves who were completely comfortable with their condition of enslavement, and that there were many, many plantation owners and slave masters who were very benevolent. Bullshit. Chattel slavery in America was the most cruel institution ever visited in the modern era.
What has shifted, do you think, in terms of the way we deal with just the visceral realities of slavery? It seems like when Roots came out, that was part of what people found empathy with through the eyes of this family. Has that shifted, or how do you see that now?
Well, I see that in the ensuing 45 years that Roots was a foundational experience for a lot of Americans, on both sides of the color line, in terms of what that experience was like.
Laura tweeted, "We were 9-year-olds in Brooklyn. Our Catholic school had a population of Irish, Italian, Polish, and Hispanics, Puerto Rican, and Cuban. None of us ever heard about this topic. It affected us because Kunta was a kid like one of our older brothers. The idea that a sibling could be stolen like Patty Hearst was scary." Laura also wrote, "I was shocked to see Ed Asner play a role so different from Lou Grant. There was so much cruelty. That's what stood out." I wonder, in terms of the storytelling, what you remember based on how ABC decided the way it was going to dramatize this novel, how true to the novel to be. What's your sense of the strategy behind telling the story?
David Wolper, the producer of Roots, enlisted all of America's favorite TV dads to play villains in Roots, right? Ed Asner, as was mentioned, Chuck Connors, the rifleman, Vic Morrow from Combat, Robert Reed, Papa Brady, Lorne Green, Lloyd Bridges, all of America's favorite TV dads played villains in Roots. Why? To lower the barrier of entry to white America.
Chris tweeted, "Do you think Roots could be made today or even shown?"
We did exactly that 5 or 6 years ago when we retold the story of Roots with a new cast. I had to be convinced that retelling the Roots story on TV was a good idea. And at the end of the day, I came down to this. I believe that this is a story that needs to be preserved in this culture. And the original Roots was made in the 70s. For today's television audiences, it might seem a little dated.
Got a lot of comments about just the impact that you and your work have had on people over the years. Julie tweeted, Mr. Burton is a great influence on my life and many others, and that his words seem to penetrate the hearts and minds of those who are looking for individuals like him. He's different because he hits the target. He speaks from the heart. Is there something just from Storytelling 101 that the rest of us could learn in terms of how to relate this history, especially to people who aren't sure they want to hear it?
The power of storytelling in general comes from its ability to rely on a core truth at its center. And no matter what story you're telling, if you're telling an historical story, you've got to find that true thread.
You're talking about finding an emotional truth through which to tell the story. And what I think I'm hearing from you is that the information kind of has to travel on the back of the emotion. Like the emotion is the conduit to relay the information. Right. Is that it?
Bingo. The story, what you are trying to communicate is the emotional truth. The information comes secondarily. You get the information as a result, and you retain the information as a result of identifying with the journey of the character and what they've gone through, right? Because that's what human beings were hardwired to pay attention to our own stories.
One last question for you. For people who are struggling to wrap their arms around these stories, around the truth about Black history, but they're kind of being buffeted by the politics on all sides, what would you say to them?
These stories are about people. This history is about people. And if you feel at all uncomfortable by learning about this history, imagine the discomfort that people of color have felt living through this history. The blood, the sweat, the tears, the sacrifices that our ancestors, Black people in America, made in order for us to be here. Those are real contributions to the American story. And to deny them or ignore them or minimize them is simply not right.
I appreciate your contributions to helping tell these American stories and helping me see my place in the future a little bit more clearly. LeVar Burton, I'm so glad to talk to you again, sir. Thank you very, very much.
Joshua, my extreme and joyous pleasure to speak with you.
Clearly, pop culture has real power to tell the stories of Black people. But perhaps the most powerful stories are the ones we tell for ourselves. And this was way before television. Photographers, journalists, novelists, and filmmakers have been shifting the perceptions of Black Americans for centuries. We have always been power users of technology, still are. And that's helping today's generations keep telling these stories. Let's get into that with NBC's Antonia Hilton. She co-hosts Southlake, a podcast that explores the racial reckoning in a small Texas town. Also with us is Lene Vanny. She's nominated for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Social Media Personality. Good to have you both with us. And Antonia, let me start with you and a story like Southlake. It's a very intense story about very deep polarization that we have to tell for a mainstream audience, whoever shows up for that. How did that factor into the way that you told the story, that you structured it?
Well, it was really one of the very first considerations that me and my co-host Mike Hixenbaugh had to work through. I mean, you're talking about this one Texas town and the fight over critical race theory, how to talk about diversity in schools, but it's a story that ultimately is about more than just that one town. We're telling an entire American story through the eyes of this one school's experience. And then it blew up into a national story. And so with that came a level of responsibility, a level of research, and a podcast was perfect for this because we had the time, 45 minutes an episode, to really sit down, to spend weeks in this town, really doing the research, having long conversations, and getting the story right.
Now, contrast 45 minutes an episode with 4 minutes of video for you, Lene, in your series Parking Lot Pimpin', which I absolutely love. For people who have not seen it, here's a little snippet of how some of the episodes begin. Watch.
Hey y'all, what's up? It's Friday, so I'm gonna keep it black, but I'm gonna keep it brief. But while I have you here, I do think this month in particular is a good time to talk to you about voter suppression. To remind you that Black History Month is just proof that everything Black people do is political. Think about it. Every act of resistance, large or small scale, every accomplishment, sit-in, march, has all been an effort to win Black people basic civil rights and freedom.
I'm loving the teacup, first of all. I love that you are literally like giving the tea while you're pouring the tea. I'm like, meta. Yes, ma'am. I like this very, very much. How do you think about who your series is for, your messaging is for, and how you put your messages together?
So my messaging is definitely for us. It's a platform that's for us, by us, to communicate to us things that have been systemically hidden from us. I like to think about information as capital and information sharing as a capitalist system. I definitely created Parking Lot Pimpin' as a way to break the mold of gatekeeping that happens in academia that keeps people from this type of information. They used to say all the time, you want to hide anything from a Black person, you put it in a book, and that has rung true as far as accessibility to certain classrooms. And even with advents in creating equitable solutions for higher education, that's not necessarily how equity works. You have to bring things to people, meet people where they are. So even as you see in the introduction, as you see in how I relate the information, it's all very important to communicate with folks in a way that they can relate to, that they can identify with, and just meet them where they are.
And I wonder where you see these debates going in the future in terms of how Black history is taught, whether or not the debate over critical race theory continues. Are we getting any closer, do you think, to finding a way forward through this? Or are we still kind of butting up against the politics so hard that, like, education's not really getting done?
We are absolutely still in conflict mode. I don't think we're at the solution stage yet. And it's interesting that Lene just brought up books, because that is the central gatekeeping point now in this fight. You're seeing parents want books removed from schools all over the country, although Texas has really been one of the epicenters of this book removal fight. And many of these books deal with race, discrimination, real U.S. history that centers Black Americans, and then also stories about LGBTQ people or Black and queer people. And many of the kids in these school districts who first were fighting against the push to remove critical race theory from their schools, or what parents believe to be critical race theory, they're now on the front lines of that fight too. And so those are kids who are having tough conversations with each other. I mean, I've witnessed it, been with kids who've had disagreements and often had a much more civil discourse than the adults.
And Lene, in our last few seconds, one tip that you would give to people who are trying to advance this discourse wherever they are, to sort of open the door to have more of these kinds of conversations before we go?
I think we definitely need to get perspective when it comes to having these conversations and just dive in. And that's the only way we can get comfortable, being uncomfortable, if we are willing to take a step past the threshold that we've been keeping ourselves from. You
kind of get through the discomfort to get a broader, a bigger comfort level. Lene, Antonia, I appreciate you both making time for us. Thank you both very much. Hey, before we go, we want to leave you with some of the words of Carter G. Woodson. He invented what has become Black History Month. Carter G. Woodson once said, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teaching of biography and history." So history is not just about information, it's about inspiration. How will you let Black history inspire you? How will you inspire others? We've shown you how others are doing it. Now, it's up to you. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for us. The news continues here on NBC News Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.